Reviewing today the BFG by Roald Dahl, and apologies for all the letters being in reverse mirror image. It's just the way this camera shoots. But anyways, the BFG by Roald Dahl. If you've been following this channel, you know that I've been revisiting the Roald Dahl stories for a couple of reasons. One, my wife is reading them for the first time, so I'm keeping up with her reading. And secondly, it's been like 35 years since I read these, so I am long overdue to reread them. And I'm discovering as I reread them how little I remember of them. So I've been doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, and the BFG. This is something my third grade teacher read to us when I was in third grade. Um, it's small tangent here, but this is interesting. I was watching an interview with Roald Dahl from on YouTube from the 1980s, and he was saying that when the BFG was published, he used to get letters from school children, or their teacher would help the children send them a letter or send him art. And he was saying that in American schools, it's been a standard practice for a long time to read aloud to children in the elementary schools in every day. And he was saying it's a shame that British schools didn't have this practice, although he mentioned it was beginning to change, and this was in the mid 80s. So I thought that was interesting to hear Roald Dahl's perspective on this, especially because most of the Roald Dahl books I had read to me by my teacher in elementary school, exactly the way he was describing it. Anyways, third grade teacher read this to us. I remember really enjoying it. I remember laughing a lot. I remember particularly the whiz popper scene. So if you're not familiar, the BFG, the Giants have this soda that they really like called Frobscottle. And the interesting thing about this soda is that the bubbles go down. Normally Coke and Pepsi or carbonated beverages, the bubbles rise to the top. Here the bubbles always go down. It's kid story logic, which means you don't burp when you drink them, but you do have these tremendous farts, which are never actually called farts in the book. They're called whiz poppers. But the Giants love making whiz poppers, and you have whiz poppers so great that it will lift you right up into the air. You can imagine how popular that would be with a class of third graders, and we laughed long and we laughed hard about that. We had a teacher who was very good at doing all the voices and stuff like that. But aside from that one scene, and maybe the beginning scene where Sophie is abducted from the orphanage, I really did not remember. Abducted from the orphanage by a hand here. I really did not remember anything of this book, so I was long overdue to reread it. Spoiler alert, I'm going to spoil everything in this video while I talk about it. I'll talk through the plot, but just in general, even though I have very fond childhood memories of this book, I found upon rereading that it did not hold up quite as well as some of these other books. So, for example, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory held up tremendously well. This was a very funny book to read even as an adult, and very imaginative. Very funny and very imaginative. So this one definitely held up even from an adult perspective. The BFG was just kind of, it's not bad. I didn't hate it. And, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps after Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, my expectations were too high, because this really is a brilliant book. This one didn't enchant me as much as an adult. And I'll go through maybe and try and talk about why. So I completely forgotten about the plot of this story. There is a plot, sort of. So Sophie is abducted by the BFG because she sees him when he walks down the street at night. So he can't have anybody seeing him. She would go and tell everyone about it, and then he would get put in the zoo, is what he's worried about. No, it's kind of ridiculous to believe that he's been going out every night and he's never been seen before, which is what the book explicitly states. He says, like, she is the first child who ever saw him. But there's a lot of things like that in this book where, yeah, it's not logical, it's not realistic. You just have to go with it. And it's a children's story, so you do want to cut it some slack. But then he takes her out to the land of the giants, where all the other giants live. Now, I guess here is maybe where I'm going to come in with maybe one of my first criticisms, is the land of the giants is pretty boring. I mean, you've got all these giants walking around, but the actual physical place is really not that interesting or all that impressive. And not really described in any sort of detail that would make you want to be interested in it. It's just kind of described as this barren land where the giants live. The BFG, which I'm sure everyone knows stands for the Big Friendly Giant, is the runt of the giants and is constantly being bullied by the other giants. So there's a picture here of Blood Bottler, one of the other giants, and you can see how much bigger he is than the BFG. I should note with these illustrations, the illustrations are all done by Quentin Blake, which is apparently he was Roald Dahl's favorite illustrator. At least that's what it says on the cover. Where does it say it? It says it somewhere in here. Illustration, yeah. Quentin Blake is a well-known artist. Actually, it doesn't say that here. I read that somewhere. It was in one of the other books. Maybe it was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Anyways, yeah, here we go. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He said it was Roald Dahl's favorite illustrator. Now, both Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator also contain illustrations by Quentin Blake. But in this case, in the case of those two books, those weren't the original illustrations. Those were the illustrations, I believe, that came out with the third edition of these books. So the first publishing, back in 1965 or whatever, was published by a different illustrator. I think the second publishing had a different illustrator yet. And it wasn't until the third republishing, much later. Like when was that? Yeah, 2016. Oh no. 1995. In the case here. So it wasn't until 1995 that Quentin Blake's illustrations were in here, but with the BFG, which was published in 1982, Quentin Blake was the original illustrator, and I think his illustrations have stayed throughout. And there's a lot of illustrations in this book. You can see if you flip through it that not every page, but about every second page or every 2 pages, page in this sense meaning a page spread, will have an illustration on it. So it's very visually friendly. And I was debating, I mean, you can also see, if you look at this, that the drawings are rather minimalist, but they have that kind of weird vibe we associate with Roald Dahl, perhaps because we grew up with these illustrations. So I think they add a lot to the flavor of the book, and I'm going to count the illustrations here as part of the charm of the book, even though that's not really Roald Dahl, that's his illustrator. But for a children's book, I think you have to count the illustrations on your appraisal, because for children's books, illustrations are part of the book. They're part of the experience of the book. And especially because with Quentin Blake, these illustrations have been here all along, at least in the BFG. I think the illustrations add to it. But the actual Land of the Giants is pretty boring. There's also a plot about catching dreams. So the BFG goes into the Land of Dreams, Dream Country it's called, where he catches dreams, which is perhaps an intriguing idea, but it's not really developed all that much. I mean, Dream Country is just described as a place with lots of mist. Like the world building in this book isn't great. Giant Country is just a nothing landscape. Dream Country is just a land with a bunch of mist. The overarching plot of this book, the conflict that needs to be resolved, is that in addition to the BFG, there are 9 bad giants who will bully the BFG. Here they are tossing them around, and who also go off every night to eat children. And they go off every night to different parts of the world and eat children. And there's a section where the BFG is telling Sophie about what different human beings taste like in different parts of the world. Sorry, I shouldn't say they go off every night to eat children. They go off every night to eat human beings. Near the end of the book, they're going off specifically to eat children. But at the beginning of the book, it's just set up that they're going to eat human beings. And they go off to a different part of the world every night. So this is obviously a universe in which time zones do not exist, in which it's night everywhere at the same time. Again, it's a children's book. You have to give it a certain amount of leeway. You can't expect it to make logical sense. But you also do have to wonder how much leeway should you give a children's book, and how much is it allowed not to make sense before your involvement in the story is lessened. So the BFG does not like the fact that the other giants are going off to eat human beings every night, and Sophie is really appalled by it. But what can they do? I mean, there's no way the BFG can stop him. Quite the contrary, the other giants are the ones that are always bullying him. So they get an idea to appeal to the Queen of England. And here is where the dream subplot merges with the real subplot. Sorry, merges with the real plot. Is in order to get the Queen of England to believe them, Sophie gets the idea that you're going to give the Queen of England a dream about all of the giants going off to eat children. So they talk about this really specific dream that the BFG is going to create by mixing all of his other dreams. So here he is collecting different dreams off of his shelf and mixing them together. Now, again, here is another spot where the logic doesn't really make sense. The incredibly specific dream that Sophie wants him to make up, complete with names and everything else, seems to be stretching a little bit, that he could just create this by mixing bits and pieces of dreams he just happened to have up on the shelf. Again, that's part of the space that you have to give this book. But then they do give this dream to the Queen of England. The BFG blows dreams into people's bedrooms. That's how he conveys dreams. And the Queen of England wakes up, and Sophie is sitting on the windowsill, just like the dream said she would be. After the Queen of England has dreamt about the giants eating the children. But the resolution to all of this is that they send the helicopters off to the land of giants, and they just tie the giants up while they're sleeping. There's a little bit of a hiccup when one of the giants wakes up halfway through, but it's quickly resolved. He gets poked in the ankle. He is made to believe that he's been bitten by a poisonous snake, and then he gets tied up. So that one aside, the other giants are just all tied up while they're sleeping, and then taken back to England by helicopter, and they are put into a hole and kept there. So, yeah, the resolution to the conflict is a little bit underwhelming. You just go and tie up all the bad giants while they are sleeping. Which is another reason why, as an adult, I may be inclined to think this isn't Roald Dahl's best book. I say that somewhat with caution because I know this book has its fans. But, yeah, I found it a bit underwhelming. Of course, when you summarize the plot like that, you're really, or what I'm essentially doing is taking away the charm of the book, because it's not really about the plot. It's about the journey. It's about, the BFG who has these great big goofy ears with which he can hear everything, and who eats these snaz cumbers, which taste absolutely awful, but they're the only thing that you can eat in Giant Land. Again, it doesn't really make sense, because here is somebody who is going out of Giant Land every night to blow dreams into children's bedrooms. So, he should be able to get his hands on some other food somehow. They do bring this up in the book. Sophie says something like that, and he says something like the food isn't big enough or something like that. I don't remember the exact reason. But yes, Snaz cumbers just taste absolutely awful, so he's got to eat it because it's the only thing to give him sustenance out here, because he refuses to eat children. I mean, why couldn't go eat fish or something like that? None of the things in this book make sense if you attempt to think about them too hard. But that's the type of book that you signed up for when you're reading this. It's just for something that just has a type of 7-year-old logic to it. And then the payoff to that is, of course, at the end, after the other giants are all put in the hole, the BFG gives them snaz cumbers. So that type of thing, the strange life of the BFG is part of the appeal. Also, the BFG has a very funny way of talking. He mispronounces his words. He has his own type of grammar, and he makes up words all the time. For example, here's a quotation from the chapter on snaz cumbers. It says, "But if you don't eat people like all the others," Sophie said, "then what do you live on?" "That is a squelching, tricky problem around here," the BFG answered. "In this slosh-funking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwiggles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It is called the snazcumber." Now, you'll have to pardon that rather uninspired reading I just gave there. My third grade teacher, when she read this, was able to really give all these voices full characteristic, and was able to make the BFG's dialogue really come alive, which is what a good teacher can do with this, or a good parent or somebody reading it aloud. So, if you had a teacher like that who was reading it aloud to you, as I did, I'm sure it very much increases the interest you would have in this story. Um, but again, as an adult, and again, I'm speaking as an adult here, the fact that the BFG is mispronouncing all his words and getting all his grammar wrong, that has limited interest now. And it's, I don't know. Part of this is a problem of going back as an adult and reading a children's book. I mean, I can't really complain because this book isn't for me. But yet I can compare it to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which was just absolutely brilliant, and say this one holds up even as an adult. This one maybe not so much. One of the things I did remember about Roald Dahl from childhood is that he had a dark sense of humor. And I remembered this impression, even though the details didn't stick with me. And that is definitely true in this book. It's set up that the giants are going out and eating people every night. Near the end of the book, we know that they're specifically going out to eat school children. And then the queen, the maid reads the queen a report about how a bunch of bones of school children were found outside of the dormitory windows the next morning. So these weren't actually characters that we knew or had been introduced to, and there's no scene describing the children being eaten. But yet it is definitely part of this book that a whole bunch of children got eaten one night by these giants, which is which is a bit dark or heavy to put into a children's book like this. Which is why children love Roald Dahl so much. I mean, that dark, twisted humor was definitely part of the appeal when we were children, wasn't it? So yeah. And then that dark humor is also at the end where there's the giants are put into the pit. So that the giants are put into this big pit, and they're fed nothing but snozcumbers. And there is a big wall that is put around them. But then it said 3 men had a little bit too much to drink for lunch one day, and they climbed up on the wall to get a look at the giants, and they fell in. And then there was a sound of all the giants cheering, and then there was the sounds of bones being crushed. So those 3 men got eaten. So then they had to put up a sign saying, "Notice, it is forbidden to feed the giants," which is another part of Roald Dahl's dark humor, which goes over with children quite well, I think. So I don't know. In conclusion, I don't really have that much to say about this one. I know I've been disparaging the book, but I shouldn't be, or I don't want to come off that way. It works well with its target audience. Children love this book. I remember my 3rd grade class really loved it. Even as an adult, it is for the most part a pretty painless read, a pretty easy read, a somewhat entertaining read. There's just not anything great about it. And maybe that's where the disconnect is coming in, is I remembered this book being really great from my childhood, and then reading as an adult, and it's just like, oh, okay, it's okay. So that's the review. It's okay. Children will love it, but as an adult, it's just okay. And I'll sign off here.